Sometimes people think my purpose is to do what I'm really good at and what I like doing, and to become successful from that. But that's a good start. But only when you use that success in a spiritual way that makes the world a more beautiful place and contributes to other people's lives will you actually feel the happiness of that success. The success in and of itself doesn't bring you happiness, but it's the utilization of that for a higher purpose. It's wonderful to be here, and it's always nice. The MC always sets you a good challenge, so I'll try not to let you down. And I hope this evening we'll have a beautiful discussion. Just a little bit of my human story behind the facts and the figures and the numbers and external facts. I grew up in Wembley, which is a suburb of northwest London. My parents are from India. And I guess when I was about 15, I had questions I was exploring about life, about meaning, about purpose, about happiness. And that really began my spiritual quest, my spiritual journey, and I started reading different books, amongst which the Bhagavad Gita, which I had grown up with, was naturally a go-to place. And so I began studying it, exploring it. I began going into the temples and asking the monks questions about what I had been reading. And soon enough, I began to see my life becoming disrupted. These words are on my mind at the moment because I've just come back from Silicon Valley and Seattle, and what to say, Palo Alto and Silicon Valley, this is the home of the disruptive thinkers, the disruptors of our time. Tesla changed the way we look at cars. Amazon changed the way we look at buying. Uber changed the way we look at transport. Apple changed the way we look at technology. All of these firms, these disruptive thinkers came in, and what they'd begun to do is break away from the norm, kind of challenge what we've always been doing, and kind of table the question, is there a better way we can be doing things? And so the disruptors of our time, sometimes they make us feel a little uncomfortable because they get us out of that zone of what we've always been doing. But it's progressive disruption, because that disruption allows us to kind of upgrade and uplift and elevate and unleash more potential. And so just like there are disruptors in the material world, there are also spiritual disruptors. His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, was perhaps one of the spiritual disruptors of the highest caliber. He came right here to New York City in 1965 and had a disruptive message for the world, a message which gets us to stop, think, contemplate, and question, in what direction is my life heading, and is it really the direction I should be taking? So when I was 15 and I started reading the Bhagavad Gita, it was definitely a time of disruption. The difference between material disruptors and spiritual disruptors is that material disruptors, they challenge products and processes. But spiritual disruptors, they challenge philosophy. Material disruptors, they challenge the how and the what of our lives. But the spiritual disruptors, they challenge the why. The material disruptors, they help us to do things better. But the spiritual disruptors, they question, are there better things we should be doing? And the material disruptors, what they do is they answer the questions that are on people's minds. But the spiritual disruptors, what they do is they question the questions. And they say, are there better questions you could be asking that will lead to a higher grade of life? So spiritual disruptors come into our life. Maybe, I don't know how many of you have experienced a little bit of disruption from the spiritual contact that you've had. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about spiritual flow and finding your flow. Because sometimes what happens is when we contact spiritual teachings in a substantial way, then there's a sense in which in the beginning it creates a little bit of unrest in your life. I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you're driving down the motorway or the freeway, as they say here, and you get a little bit distracted and then you miss your exit. Isn't that an annoying moment? And really what you want to do in that moment is just hit the brakes and reverse back and just go and you're like, but I can't do that. And you've almost missed the exit, and what you have to do is you just have to accept it. And then you have to drive and drive and drive, and you're like, I'm getting further and further away from where I want to be. And then eventually you get off at the next exit, turn all the way around, and then come back and then get the exit. So sometimes we may have this experience that our life is going in a certain direction. We contact spiritual wisdom, and then we're kind of like, oh my God, I think I missed the exit. But at the same time, our life is moving in a certain direction. So then there feels like there's a disconnect between my life and where I'm spending my time and energy. And that's disconnecting with ideas and philosophies and principles of living that are resonating more and more with me. But now I don't know how to bring those two into alignment, into synergy. And so finding your spiritual flow really means, how do you continue living your life? That means your life with your family, your life in your career, your life in society and your social circles. How do you continue on that journey and at the same time take all of this knowledge that you're getting and kind of seamlessly integrate it? Because one of two things often happens. One is that we just find we can't integrate it and we just kind of let that wisdom go. Or we almost feel like we want to embrace that wisdom and live that spirituality, but we can't integrate it with this life, and then almost sometimes you feel like you're living a double life. And I think finding your spiritual flow is where you learn to bring both things together seamlessly. So I guess we'll have a little bit of a discussion about this. We have about an hour. I probably won't speak for an hour, but I'll share some ideas with you and then kind of ask you what your thoughts, your questions, your kind of concerns, or your insights may be on bringing together the spiritual with your very real life in this world. I'll just begin with some prayers and then we'll read from the Bhagavad Gita and then we'll go from there. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Presthaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vashati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. as we were coming up the lift in the building, I remembered a story of a group of friends who had come to New York, and as they checked into New York, they came into the Hilton and they had a room booked on the 100th floor of the Hilton, the penthouse suite. And so they checked into their room, saw the beautiful view of the city that never sleeps, and they thought, let's go out for a bit of an adventure. So they went out, they went to restaurants, they went to a few clubs and experienced the nightlife, and exhausted, they came back to the hotel at 4 o'clock in the morning, and as they walked into the lobby, they walked up to the lift only to find the sign, lift out of order. Now when you're on the 100th floor and the lift is out of order, it's a bit of your heart drops. But they realized what to do. We have to bite the bullet. So they began walking up the stairs and making that ascent up to the 100th floor. So they got about to the 20th floor and they said, we better start telling each other stories, because otherwise this is gonna take a long time. And so they started telling each other stories to kind of speed up the kind of process. And they got to the 80th floor and they looked at one of their friends and they said, you're really quiet, you haven't told any stories, why don't you say something? He said, my story is tragic, you don't want to hear my story. They said, no, it's okay, that'll probably be good for us, make it quicker. He said, my story is that we checked into the 100th floor, into our penthouse suite, we went out on town, we came back, the lift was out of order, we began climbing the stairs, we're on the 80th floor, but we left the key in the lobby. And at that point they were about to throw him out of the 80th floor. And it's very interesting because sometimes we may feel like that, like we're rising in our life. We're rising, we're achieving, we're striving in so many of the goals that we set out for. But even if after rising to those places, we still somehow feel as though maybe we missed something, maybe we left something behind. Maybe even after all of those things, there still remains a sense of vacuum or a sense of emptiness in some space of my being. And how do I fulfill that? How do I resolve that? And so spiritual knowledge really helps us to understand how we can strive in this world, how we can achieve, how we can be really successful, but at the same time integrate spirituality within it. And that makes a very, very beautiful and powerful combination. However, that integration is not easy. And so today I want to read to you from the Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is someone who's on a journey of integration. He's trying to integrate his identity as a warrior, as a king, a future king, as a family person. And he's trying to integrate that with a spiritual quest that he's on. And after Krishna begins giving him knowledge in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna says something very, very interesting. He's kind of hearing what Krishna is saying about spiritual knowledge, about spiritual principles, and it's resonating with him. It's kind of seeping into his heart. He kind of feels like, yeah, this makes total sense. But then he says something very, very interesting to Krishna. And in Sanskrit he says, Gachinno bhaya vibhrashtas channabhram iva nashyati apritasto mahabaho vimuda brahmana pati. So Arjuna has received knowledge from Krishna, understanding his spiritual quest. But Arjuna has a doubt. And he says, "O Krishna, what about a person who takes up the spiritual journey but is diverted, distracted from the path of transcendence? They fall away from both spiritual and material success. They, Krishna, seem to perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere." So this is very, very interesting. What Arjuna is saying to Krishna is that sometimes we're going on our journey of life and we receive spiritual wisdom. And when we receive spiritual wisdom, when that spiritual disruption comes, we can never really quite be the same person again. Because now all this knowledge comes into our heart and mind, we don't see the world in the same way. One person once said, becoming a spiritualist is like joining the mafia. You can't leave because you know too much. So it's almost like that. Once you begin on this spiritual journey and you begin hearing a lot of this enlightening wisdom, we can't engage with the world in the same way. But here Arjuna says, what about if you try to walk away from materialism towards spirituality, but you don't quite manage to achieve that spiritual consciousness, that spiritual perfection that you're looking for? Then isn't it like one cloud that leaves a huge body of clouds, tries to reach another body of clouds, but doesn't quite reach it, and ends up suspended in the middle with no status in either sphere? He said, does this sometimes happen to spiritual people who go on this quest of actually trying to deepen their lives, and almost they begin to look at their lives and they feel like, I don't really connect with the material world in the same way and the material goals. And at the same time, I don't really feel like I'm fully spiritual and I've fully embraced this path. And it almost feels like I'm in no man's land. And I think some of us may feel a little bit like this, that we've gained this wisdom, but now living it and embracing it and applying it is somewhat challenging. If I were to ask you, what are some of the challenges you face in being a spiritual person while simultaneously conducting your journey through this world with your various responsibilities, duties, roles, and different identities that you play? What are some of the challenges in finding integration between spirituality and your day-to-day life here? What would you say some of those challenges are? Yes?
Expectations. So the gist of Bhagavad Gita is to do your action without expectations or without expectation of result. But that's the very first human tendency, is like you want to do good at work or at home with family. There's a natural tendency, I think, for almost everyone to expect to get credit for that. Right?
Yeah, so striving for results, expecting results, and also living up to the expectations of others who are very much measuring you on your externals. And although we know this spiritual wisdom that we should be detached from the results, we still very much cling on to those results as a kind of sense of self-worth. Yeah, thank you. Anything else?
We're living a dual life.
You're living a dual life. You feel like that?
You have the spiritual, where you are engaged spiritually, and then you wake up and you are on the other side, where you're doing, I mean, you do imbibe things which you've learned, but again, that chasm is...
Yeah, you feel like there's a gap there where you can't fully embrace all of the principles that you believe in all of your activities.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Yes?
I'll invite you to be with me while I'm on the 19th mile of a marathon.
Okay.
And at that time, when the whole effort is insurmountable, I almost justify, why do I need to do this? Sometimes, and if you let go because you feel the marathon is not really that important, often one feels that spirituality and wisdom is that justification not to strive for. How do we try and conflate both of them?
Yeah. So not to strive for what exactly?
What I meant is, life could be a marathon where you're striving, it's
yeah.
painful.
Mhm.
Very often one feels that one is embracing spirituality,
And it almost
You're trying
becomes an
to opt out
escapism from
that's
being
right. So,
okay.
It's like, should you be doing that, and are we trying to find succour in spirituality and not going the full route?
Not being ambitious and striving for our goals.
That's right.
All right.
And that
Shall we take the
introduces-
conversation in this direction? Is that an interesting conversation for everyone? How do spiritualists remain ambitious in a world that they ultimately see as temporary, illusory, and material? How do we still act here and bring out the best from ourselves? Shall we go there?
I'd love that, because I'm sure the universe
All right, let's go
is
there.
to me there. Thank you.
All right, let's go there. Can spiritualists and people who embrace spiritual wisdom, can they still be ambitious in this world? Oftentimes, even when I was starting my spiritual journey at the age of 18, I studied computer science and management at UCL, University College London, and all my friends were doing internships, Morgan Stanley, Credit Suisse, Accenture, and so on and so forth. And I was beginning my spiritual journey, and I felt a growing disinterest in that. And people around me noticed that. And they felt that spirituality was very, very dangerous, because what spirituality would do is it would kill your ambition. It would kill your desire to kind of strive in this world and do something, because you almost become so otherworldly that you kind of don't engage with the world in the same way. And what you're saying, that sometimes we may use that philosophy to justify a certain lethargy, a certain laziness, a certain apathy towards the world. And so, can spiritual people be ambitious? What the Bhagavad Gita teaches us is that not only can spiritual people be ambitious, but actually spiritual people are the most ambitious. However, there is a difference between those who pursue ambition in a material way and those who pursue their ambitions in a spiritual way. And there's certain things which distinguish them. And perhaps you could say there are 5 kind of things that immediately come to my mind. The goal, the driver, the mentality, the measure, and the culture. There can be a materially ambitious person, and there can be a spiritually ambitious person, and they can both go on to do incredible things in the world, but on these 5 points, they differ. And the first thing is, the goal of a materially ambitious person and the goal of a spiritually ambitious person is very different. The goal of a materially ambitious person is to enjoy and to exploit. But the goal of a spiritually ambitious person is to serve and to contribute. When Srila Prabhupada was traveling around America, then he once came to a city, and there was a conference, and a reporter, an Indian reporter, put his hand up and he said, "Swamiji, why have you come to America?" So Prabhupada looked straight back at him and said, "Why have you come to America?" And he looked at Srila Prabhupada and he said, "Better opportunities." And Srila Prabhupada looked back and said, "Me too." But I came for opportunities to serve, to give, to contribute, to make a positive change. And so, you can be spiritually ambitious. And the way you do it is by ensuring that your goal is to contribute. When you want to contribute, you can work as hard, if not harder, than people who are striving for selfish things in this world. So the first distinguishing factor is the goal. The second distinguishing factor is the driver. What drives a materialistic person to be ambitious in the world is a sense of emptiness within. I'm lacking something within, And therefore what I do is I go into the world to try to achieve something so that I feel a sense of completeness. And that's why people strive and strive. But a spiritually ambitious person, where are they coming from? A place of abundance. They're fulfilled. They're overflowing with joy, with spiritual nourishment. And therefore they go into the world out of a place of abundance and wanting to share that joy with others. And therefore they become more ambitious. Because if you're driven by vacuum, you can go so far. But if you're driven by abundance, you have so much more energy. The third thing that distinguishes materially ambitious and spiritually ambitious people is mentality. A materially ambitious person thinks that they are the one controlling, they are the one achieving, they are the ones who are doing. In Sanskrit we say kartaham iti manyate. They think that I'm the doer. But a spiritually ambitious person, they know that I'm an instrument. I'm an instrument of divinity. And if I connect with divinity and act as a transparent instrument without any selfish motivation, then divinity can work through me to achieve incredible things in this world. And therefore they act, and their mentality is to be instrumental. The measure of success for a materially ambitious person is that they want to see an external result. But the measure of success for a spiritually ambitious person is that their success is in making the best endeavor. You see, when we attach our goals to things that we're in control of, then those goals are much more satisfying, achievable, and actually lead us to making our greatest contribution. So when we attach our goals to things that we're not in control of, I want to be better than that person, I want to earn this much money, I want to have this much popularity, not only are those goals superficial, but those goals are beyond your control. Therefore, the karma yogi, which is what Krishna talks about in the Gita, what they do is they attach their goals to that which they're in control of. My effort, my learning, my character, the values with which I conduct my activities. And when you attach your goals to that which you're in control of, not only do you achieve your goals, but you also craft the perfect endeavor that will bring about the greatest result. And so the measure of someone in these realms is different. And the final thing is culture. The difference between a materially ambitious and a spiritually ambitious person is the culture with which they pursue their ambition. When we pursue ambitions in a material way, then what we'll find is that our culture, our character, our values, our principles, to some extent become compromised in the heat of the moment. But spiritually ambitious people, they earn success, but they earn it with integrity. They earn it founded upon dharma. And this is the universal cycle. Dharma leads to artha, which leads to kama, which ultimately leads one to moksha and looking at what's beyond. And therefore, if you see, Srila Prabhupada was the most ambitious. Because what did he do at the age of 70? He came to America all alone with 40 rupees, not knowing anyone. He said, I came off the boat, I didn't know whether to go left or right. And at the age of 70, he started his enterprise to share spirituality all over the world. And what did he do? 11 years later, he had 108 temples, he had circled the globe 14 times, he had written over 100 books, he had initiated over 5,000 students, and he had made Hare Krishna a household name. In fact, the CNN did a report on the 10 most famous people who started their careers after 50, and Srila Prabhupada was in that top 10. So spiritual people are the most ambitious. Spirituality is not an excuse for escapism. It's not that spiritualists don't own anything, but it's that they're not owned by anything. And that's exactly what the Gita is based on, that there's this immature response of Arjuna of wanting to eject himself on the basis of spiritual teachings. But Krishna says no. In a beautiful verse, he explains, Tasmad sarveshu kaleshu mamanu smarayudhyacha mayarbita mano buddhir mamevaisya samsayaha. He says, therefore at all times engage in battle and at the same time remember me. In other words, be active, be alive, be an achiever, and at the same time factor in spiritual consciousness. And therefore, in that way, not only do you maintain your ambition in the world, but you actually elevate your ambition. Because number one, the goal is service. Number two, the driver is that you're serving from a place of abundance. Number three, the mentality is that I'm not relying on my limited abilities. Now I'm going to channel a much higher energy and therefore I can do so much more. Number four, the measure is not things which I can't control. The measure is my success is if I can go to bed at night and say, I did my best, I'm successful. And that brings about your greatest contribution. And number five, the culture of a spiritually ambitious person is that in the process of trying to achieve in the world, I never compromise my principles and my values. Because where there is dharma, then artha and karma will come. And therefore, this is the dharma of how to actually be successful in the world. And so, if the Gita and this spirituality is understood in the right way, then far from making one lazy or lethargic or dysfunctional or disinterested or distracted from the world, far from that, it should actually empower one to make their greatest contribution. And that's how spirituality and ambition kind of seamlessly integrate with each other.
Very nice.
So, I don't know if you want to respond to that or if there was anything that addressed what you...
It absolutely did. It absolutely did. That's the dichotomy with live, that we understand we are incomplete.
Yeah.
And what you said, I think it's our lack of self-esteem in some way which drives us to possess more and perpetually try to prove to the world that we're worthy.
Yeah.
And I think if we can fill the gap in our life, a lot of that could be solved with a lot of love. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yes. Yes.
So I just have a follow-up on this very beautiful discussion here. Like when you say materially ambitious person and spiritually ambitious person, the goals of a materially ambitious person are tangible, right? Like money, power, fame, some derivative of that. And they're just trying to increase how much maximum they can get for that. For a spiritually ambitious person, what are the exact goals of a spiritually ambitious person? And like, this classification, is this correct? Is spirituality more a way of life, not so much like comparing it to materialism? Because to survive, everyone needs that, right? And so spirituality by itself, is it like, can we compare it to a material thing, or is it just like the process by which you're achieving that can be something which is you're more happy and joyful and blissful yourself? So is that the goal of spirituality?
Yeah, no, thank you so much for asking this question, and it's a good clarification to have. So let's, for example, say we have this spiritually ambitious people and materially ambitious people. The way I'm coming at this discussion is that there's a success that both of them are looking for. And that success could be defined in terms of a position, a power, a profit. It's not that spiritual people, you're looking for those things. But what's the difference? Say, for example, it's kind of like, back in the day we used to have tapes, if you remember, like all those years back, they used to have cassettes. And sometimes they were the two spools, right? and they're moving in the same direction. They look like they're doing exactly the same thing, but one spool is getting bigger and bigger, and the other spool is becoming smaller and smaller. And sometimes this analogy is given to explain the state of a spiritually ambitious person and a materially ambitious person. They're moving in the world in the same way. They're seeking the same thing. But because on these 5 factors, the subtle factors, their orientation is completely different. They're seeking and they're achieving the same things, but their destiny is becoming very, very different, and their karmic consequences becoming very, very different because of these 5 factors. So Srila Prabhupada was also interested in numbers. He was also interested in quantifiable measures of success. But what was his goal? What was his driver? What was his mentality? What was his measure of success? What was his culture and character? That was completely different. And that's what made him a spiritually ambitious person. So therefore, yes, success is what everyone is looking for. But what the idea of spirituality is, what precedes the success is that you earn your success with integrity. And what follows the success is that you utilize that success with generosity in service. Whereas for a materially ambitious person, it's just about success. And sometimes this bit and this bit is missing. And that kind of success is sometimes feels like those individuals who walked to the 80th floor and left the key behind. Does that help to clarify? Yes.
So my question is, most religious traditions and spiritual traditions preach of values like love and kindness, and obviously these stem from empathy. So a person has to be empathetic to be able to give love and to be kind. But at the same time, a spiritual person is supposed to be detached. So how do we, is it a balance, or does detachment lead to love and kindness ultimately?
Wonderful, thank you so much. Yeah, so on one hand, we're supposed to be detached, and on the other hand, we have relationships in the world, and relationships are beautiful because of the love, because of the sacrifice, because of the commitment we have to others. See, there's a difference between affection and attachment. A spiritual person is affectionate, but they're not attached. And what's the distinction between the two? See, it's not that when you become a spiritual person, you lose your heart and you just become cold towards everyone else. The example is Arjuna himself. At the beginning of the battle, Krishna told Arjuna, you're a spiritual being, and for the soul there's neither birth nor death. Therefore don't lament for anything. Continue on with your duty. You're an eternal spiritual being, and the wise lament neither for the living nor for the dead. 10 days into the battle, Arjuna's son, Abhimanyu, was killed. Arjuna asked Krishna to take the chariot to that place in the battlefield. And the interesting thing is that when Arjuna saw his son dead, he began to cry and cry and cry. The Mahabharata explains. And in that moment, Krishna never tapped him on the shoulder and said, hey, remember what I told you, detachment. No, Krishna said, you must grieve. But what happened is that after Arjuna grieved, then in the very next moment, he picked up his bow and he understood what his duty was. So this is very, very instructive, because what attachment does is it's an unhealthy amount of affection that actually leads to you doing that person a disservice. Sometimes in the name of, for example, parents' affection for their children, it's actually a type of attachment which means they try to control their children, and then not only do they become frustrated, but their children also become frustrated. Sometimes in the name of attachment, we do things for people that are not good for them. Another prime example is Dhritarashtra and Duryodhana. Dhritarashtra didn't just have affection for Duryodhana, but he was attached to Duryodhana. And therefore, he began to do things for him that were not good for him. So there's a point where affection loses its sense of understanding the higher perspective of who that individual is and how to best serve them, and then it goes into the realm of attachment. And so it's not that spiritual people are cold, it's not that spiritual people are heartless. Spiritual people have the best relationships of love and kindness and compassion, but they know at what point they have to step away and let people then exercise their own free will. So in that way, you can be detached and still loving and involved in other individuals' lives. Does that help? Yeah. Yes.
Then how do you keep detaching yourself?
How do you keep detached when you feel that you're getting too into... That's why spiritual wisdom is so important. You know, like when a painter is painting on a canvas, then what they do is they regularly step back from the whole canvas so they can see the whole picture. And then what they do is they go back into the canvas and realize, I need to work on this bit. So what happens in our life often is that we get so absorbed in our day-to-day identities, and because we have no disconnect from that identity, we almost get lost and we lose our perspective. When I was in India, I asked one eminent spiritualist for some advice, and he said, every year disconnect for 1 month, every month disconnect for 1 day, and every day disconnect for 1 hour. And then he said, disconnect to connect. And I was like, you should be on TEDx. But I always try to follow that principle. That, you know, when you take some time away from things and you look at it from a detached perspective, then you actually get the perspective you need to then go in and act appropriately. Like children, you have your children and you have so many dreams and desires and aspirations for them. But at some point, even parents have to realize, I need to let go. You know, there was once a husband and a wife and they were having an argument. Doctor, lawyer. No, he should be a doctor. He should be a lawyer. Anyway, it went to the court. And then the judge heard them arguing. The father was saying doctor, the mother was saying lawyer, doctor, lawyer. So the judge looked at both of them and said, why don't you just ask him what he wants to be? And they looked back at the judge as though he was crazy, and they said, but he's not even born yet. And then they realized in that moment, oh my God, like even before a child is born, you already have it all planned out. That's how attached. And that's how much we try to sometimes unknowingly control someone else's life. So there's a healthy amount of detachment when you're a parent. There's a healthy amount of detachment in your relationship with your partner. There's a healthy amount of detachment with your friends, where you're not cold, where you're not disinterested, but at what point you know, I need to step away and I need to just let them exercise their own free will. Yes.
Sorry. So just on that point, one is on a spiritual path and one gets derailed for some reason because you give in to your desires or pleasure at some point. How do you get yourself back on the track?
So just like Arjun is saying, that sometimes you feel like you're in the middle and you know where you want to go, but you get derailed. How do you get back on track? By getting back on track. When a plane goes from one airport to another, say London Heathrow to JFK, then there's a flight path. Here's a fun fact for you. On any given flight, did you know that the plane is only ever on the flight path for about 20% of the journey? most of the time the plane is off the flight path because of wind, because of other reroutes or whatever. But the interesting thing is, even though the plane is off the flight path for 80% of the journey, still 8 hours later it arrives at the destination. Why? Because although the pilot is off the flight path, what the pilot is always endeavoring to do is get back to the flight path. Therefore, Krishna says to Arjuna in a very beautiful verse, Yato yato nischalati manaschan chalamastiram tadastato niyam yetad atmanyeva vasam nayet. Krishna says, from wherever the mind wanders due to its flickering nature, always bring it back. And then the mind will go and always bring it back. And therefore the art of focusing is to keep refocusing. And so yes, on the journey of the spiritualist, we'll be faced with times of distraction, deviation, temptation. At times we may look at our life and we think, I'm off the path. Sometimes we're looking for the perfect week and we realize it doesn't exist. Then we're looking for the perfect day and we realize it doesn't exist. Looking for the perfect morning, and even that's difficult because something always seems to go wrong. But that's okay. You just need to keep coming back to the path. And what happens is through that continued endeavor, then eventually one is situated in their principles. Like that. Thank you. Yes?
So back to the original discussion of spiritually ambitious versus materially ambitious.
Yes.
Sometimes it appears the discussion meant either you are this or that. Can you be both?
Yes. Yes, and often we oscillate between the two. And in some aspects we may be more of a materialistic mentality, and in other aspects we may have more of a spiritual perspective. It's interesting, in the Bhagavad Gita you have this kind of 16th chapter which talks about the divine and the demoniac. And it's explained that in Satya, which is, if you're familiar with Vedic time, the cosmic cycle goes through 4 ages, like we have 4 seasons. So the original age was Satya, and it said in that age, divine and demoniac lived on different planets. In the next age, Treta, they lived on the same planet, but in different families. In Dwapara, they lived on the same planet, in the same family, but they resided in different individuals. And by the time it comes to Kali, they're in the same planet, the same family, and in the same individual. And so we almost have these two sides to us, this higher nature and this lower nature, this kind of spiritual mentality, and then this very materialistic thoughts which also come in, and we're battling. And we're kind of on that continuum somewhere. And so yes, we are complex in our psychology. But the idea is that the more and more we cultivate on these 5 measures, is my goal selfless? Is my driver from a place of abundance? All those things I mentioned, as we keep rededicating ourselves, we actually find that not only do we make our greatest contribution, but we feel happy and satisfied and content in that success. Purpose is never selfish. Sometimes people think my purpose is to do what I'm really good at and what I like doing, and to become successful from that. But that's a good start. But only when you use that success in a spiritual way that makes the world a more beautiful place and contributes to other people's lives will you actually feel the happiness of that success. The success in and of itself doesn't bring you happiness, but it's the utilization of that for a higher purpose. And so it's always about orientating one back to that. Yes?
So, to say that I'm in spiritual, what is the to-do list?
What's that to-do list? that defines you as a spiritual person. Of course,
If I
spiritual.
can add
Yes.
one more thing to that, to
Sure.
a very connected thought. So the material world obviously has got very clear milestones. Like both are quest, and the quest can take like 1 year, it could take 10 years, but there are
But it's more
milestones
tangible.
more tangible, and I would say like Arjun had Krishna to correct him or to show him the path. But in our lives, who is going to be the Krishna? You can measure that. Okay, am I on the right path? Okay, I want to be on the spiritual path, but am I on the right path and am I making progress? I mean,
Yeah, how do you, yeah, wonderful. When Srila Prabhupada presented the Bhagavad Gita, he didn't present it so much as a religion, but what he presented it as was a spiritual science. And so he says the Bhagavad Gita gives you a hypothesis, and then it gives you an experiment. And then if you engage in that experiment, there will be an observation, there will be an experience. And so what is the experiment? What is that to-do list of going on that spiritual journey? We could say, if and when in your life you begin to integrate some key principles, and perhaps we could say of those key principles, 4 are foremost. The Sanskrit words svadhyay, sadhana, seva, and sangha. When these 4 things become part of our daily life, then we can understand we're undertaking the experiment of the Bhagavad Gita. Svadhyaya means engaging with spiritual wisdom, reading, grasping, discussing, questioning, clarifying, and looking at the world through a higher dimensional lens of wisdom. Svadhyaya. Sangha means associating and connecting with spiritual people and learning from their journeys, learning from their experiences and insights. Seva means to employ whatever we've been given, whatever we've received in our journey in spiritual service, in selfless work for God, for others. And sadhana means a daily spiritual practice where one disconnects from the world and spends that time trying to connect with divinity, with God, with Krishna. So this is the experiment. And they're very measurable things. Right? You can measure how many hours or how many minutes are you going to read, what practical service are you doing, how are you forming those relationships, how are you spending that time in disconnection. These are all tangible things. And what is basically explained is then, one may say, then what's the observation? How do I know it's working? So there's another beautiful verse in the scriptures. Bhakti pareshan ubhavo viraktir anyatra chesha trika eka kalaha prapadyamanasya yathashnata shushtusti pustikshud apayo nughasham. The analogy is given of when you eat. When you eat, 3 things happen. Tushti, you feel some immediate pleasure of the tongue. Pushti, you feel some nourishment and energization of your body. And Kshud apayo, you feel freedom from hunger. If these 3 things happen, you can understand that you've eaten and you've digested. In the same way, when you practice spirituality, this sadhana, seva, sangha, svadhyaya, if it's done appropriately, then what should happen is, number 1, just as when you eat you feel pleasure, you should feel a joy, a positivity, a sense of fulfillment and contentment in your life that you never received in anything else you were doing. The second thing is, just as you get a direct kind of sense of nourishment, the second thing that should happen if you practice these things appropriately is you should feel a direct experience of divinity. You should feel the participation, the involvement, the intervention of God in your life. And the third thing is shuddhapayo. Just as when you eat, you feel a freedom from hunger. When you actually practice spirituality, You should feel a growing detachment from all the material goals that people are so enamored by. Again, it doesn't mean that you don't strive and you're not ambitious, but you don't pin your hopes for happiness on those things. And in this way, we begin to see, I'm changing. I'm changing. I'm still in the world. I'm still doing everything everyone is doing, but my consciousness, the orientation of what I value is changing. And so in this way, Krishna actually says that this knowledge can be directly perceived. And you'll be able to see that.
Talking about the divine guidance, the divine intervention that you're talking about, what are the few signs of it, and particularly I want to hear from your life. How did it happen and how did it guide you to where you are right now?
Thank you so much. Yeah. So what does divine intervention look like in our life? How do we actually experience God? What does that mean? I think it's just as any relationship. How do you know that you're developing a relationship of love with someone? In one sense, can you see love? It's more like you experience that love. How do you experience that love? Through the arrangements that someone makes in your life, through the hope and the inspiration that they give you, through the wisdom that they give you when you're going through problems. These are ways in which we understand I have a tangible relationship with this person. And one will feel the exact same thing in their relationship with divinity. It's not theoretical. When I came to the temple on a very early visit once, I said to one of the monks there, I said, I don't know if I believe in Krishna. And he said, we're not trying to convince you to believe in Krishna. So I said, what are you trying to do then? He said, we're giving you the tools and practices and processes by which you'll be able to perceive the presence of Krishna at every moment in your life. It's not just a belief, you can perceive it. So how will you experience divine intervention? You'll feel that giving of wisdom. You'll feel that direction. You'll feel that arrangements being made. You'll feel a tangible answer to your queries as you open up your heart and try to understand how to act in any given situation. You'll feel that inspiration coming. You'll feel that voice of intuition. Intuition is very interesting. In the world today, even science doesn't know how to explain intuition. For example, a very eminent scientist can be racking his brains trying to solve a problem, and he just can't. And then he's out like gardening or like picking out weeds or something, and then boom, it just comes. And science has no way of explaining it because it's just not mathematically explainable how that idea could have come up. So intuition is also very much a part of divine intervention, that there's a super consciousness, there's a super soul within us, which is guiding every living entity. The question here was, how do we know what to do? Because Krishna is not our charioteer. The amazing thing is Krishna is your charioteer, because Krishna is in your heart. But that means we have to have that divine connection. And Krishna won't speak to you unless you speak to him. Being close to Krishna is not enough. You have to speak to Krishna. That's why in the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna is sitting right next to Krishna, but he's still riddled with problems. But only when he starts talking to Krishna does Krishna start talking back to him, and then his problems are solved. Therefore, this also counts culturally, that sometimes culturally, by our upbringing and tradition, we may be close to Krishna. Krishna was always in our family, Krishna was always in our life, the Bhagavad Gita was always a book which was there. But being close to it is not enough. One has to start interfacing. And then being close is useful, because then divine intervention and that inspiration can come. So it's a very tangible thing. You can experience it.
Swami, thank you so much for doing this with us. So one other, coming back to the theme of integration, as you start to, in a simple context, as you walk towards the east, the west is left behind, and you start to do that, you start to enjoy that journey. And what I find interesting about that is, you get misunderstood by the folks that are seeing you walking towards the east when everyone's sort of walking towards the west. And it doesn't have to be dramatic, but there are moments of that detachment that land, uncomfortably on people, where you are pulling out, you're pulling away, and it looks like you're sort of being irresponsible or negligent or cold.
Yeah.
Yet you know that this is the boundary you want to set, and this is the direction you want to go.
Yeah.
How does one sort of navigate, smoothly? If it's even possible, maybe it's always.
Yeah, this is such a, thank you for raising that. Yeah, we're moving in a different direction. When the spiritual disruption occurs in your life, then goals begin to change. Desires begin to change. Your lifestyle changes. Your vision of how you want to spend your time changes. And it's scary for you. And it's even more scary for the people around you, because they're looking at you and they're thinking, my God, you're changing. And therefore, often many people who embark on the spiritual journey will go through this disruption, that they'll begin to think they're surrounded by people who don't really understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. And so how do we navigate those relationships? I think the first thing is with great patience. Sometimes as we embark on our spiritual journey, the amount that we're changing and how that can concern others, we may not even be sensitive to. Sometimes we don't see how much we're changing, but other people do. And so I think a lot of patience, a lot of explanation is required. The second thing is the people around us, we can also invite them to be part of that journey as well as we walk towards the east. Knowing that that's a beautiful space to be, we can also try to bring them as part of that journey. Of course, you can't force anyone, but many will be willing. And then the third thing is that, what can I say? To follow your inner aspirations, to follow your calling, your purpose. You may not always be able to please everyone. But sometimes the goal of life is not to please everyone, but it's to serve everyone in the best way. And sometimes to serve people in the best way, we also sometimes may have to, in an intermediate sense, do something which may not be completely understandable to them. So I experienced this myself when I was 21 and I graduated and I had the opportunity of a career to walk away from it and become a monk. As you can imagine, it caused a little bit of unrest. And it was a turbulent time. But now I can see how, following my dharma ultimately meant that my dharma protected me and it protected everyone around me. And now those relationships are very, very good, actually. So yes, it's disruption. Again, it comes back to what I started. It's disruption. And sometimes to get into your spiritual flow, you sometimes have to disrupt your life. And that change is difficult, but then you get into a flow state where you can move progressively. Yes.
So my question, I don't know if I'm being too ambitious, but then I feel like as a mother, I always feel that I really want to promote that stillness and that connection with yourself.
Yeah.
So a bit divine.
Sure.
Is that possible?
Is that possible, in the world we're living?
To imbibe that culture of
With your children, you mean,
Yeah,
and your
yeah.
family? Yeah. St. Francis of Assisi, he said, I preach every day, I preach every week of the year. I'm always preaching, and now and again I say something. Sometimes they say, your character is speaking so loud I can't hear what you're saying. In other words, the best tool that we have to inspire, encourage, and empower others is our own example. We can't take the world to a higher place than what we've reached internally ourselves. And so I think when we embody that stillness, when we embody that spirituality, when we show the joy of what it means to live with higher principles, I think it's so attractive, it becomes naturally inspirational to people around you, and especially children, to emulate that. But if we try to do it without experiencing it, without embodying it, then it becomes a little bit more of a struggle. And when all is said and done, again, I come back to my other point, we can only try our best. Even Krishna at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, after speaking all the knowledge to Arjuna, tells him in a beautiful verse, Iti te jnanamakyatam guyad guyataram maya vimrashe tadasheshena yatechasi tata guru. Krishna says to Arjuna, I've given you all the knowledge, I've given you all the wisdom, now you think about it, you reflect on it, you challenge it, yata icha tata guru, and whatever is your desire, that you do. So even Krishna steps away and says, it's up to you now. So that level of detachment after we've done what we can is required. Okay. Is there any final question? Someone asked a question. Okay. Yes? Okay.
Just on a different tangent, there's a lot of talk in pop spirituality, popular culture, about manifestation, about law of attraction. So what are your thoughts about this, and is there any such mention in Hindu scriptures?
Thank you so much. So the law of manifestation, the secret. Ask. What is it? Ask, believe, and receive. Those are the 3 points. You ask the universe what you want, and then you have to believe that it's coming to you, and then you have to open your heart and mind to fully embrace it and receive it. And in this way, Rhonda Byrne tells us you can manifest anything you want. So what do we think about the secret? So I say 3 things. There's truth to the secret, there's more to the secret, and there's a secret behind the secret. I'll explain what I mean. There's truth to the secret because everything begins in the mind. We say it's all in the mind. So whatever we meditate on, dhyayado, vishayan pumsha, whatever we meditate on, that then determines our desires, our endeavors, our activities, and therefore naturally what you're contemplating is going to drive the trajectory of your life. So there's some truth to the secret because your mind is powerful. However, number 2, there's more to the secret because we are not the sole architects of our destiny. There are other factors beyond our control which are conspiring to create the future results. Therefore, 2 people can put exactly the same mental and physical energy into something and receive very different results. That's known as the law of karma. And so what Rhonda Byrne doesn't take into account is that there are other laws and factors which are influencing outcomes, which are not necessarily directed to our mental state at this point. So the second point is that there's more to the secret. But the third point of the Gita is that there's a secret behind the secret. And the secret behind the secret is that even if the law of attraction was true and you could attract anything you want, the basic problem in the world is that people are trying to attract the wrong things. And therefore, even if you were able to attract whatever you wanted, it wouldn't necessarily make you more happy. Saint Teresa of Avila, she says, more tears were shed from prayers that were answered than prayers that were unanswered. There's the story of the husband and wife who are celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. They were both 60, and the genie came and said to the husband, any wish you want. He said, I wish my wife was 30 years younger. Boom, he became 90. It's like, no, there must be some mistake here. No, you wanted it. No, I thought she was going to, no, you just said 30 years younger. So it's very interesting. Our life is sometimes like that. We ask for things, but we ask for the wrong things. Therefore, the Gita tells us the secret behind the secret. What is worthy of attracting? And if you know that secret, then you'll realize that the things that are worthy of attracting are actually completely in your control. The things that are unworthy of attracting, you need certain karmic configuration to get it. So you may or you may not get it. But the things that you deeply desire, the things that are actually going to make you happy, those things you can attract simply by your own consciousness. Therefore, the secret does work when you're trying to pursue that which you're supposed to pursue. And that's the secret behind the secret. All right, I see more hand. Okay, is that the last one? Okay. We will give you the last, because you triggered our conversation, so we will give you the last.
It's been a very, very calming experience. I flew in this morning, and this has been absolutely worth it. And I must say, even at the risk of sounding patronizing, that religious gurus today oscillate between mystical to plain patronizing or almost insolent. But this has been such a beautiful adult-to-adult conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
So I'll end it with, could you tell us a little bit about yourself, the person, how you came to be?
Yes, I think I began the talk by talking about disruption, and the Bhagavad Gita really disrupted my life. It started showing me things about myself, things about the world, and things about purpose and meaning and happiness that I had never encountered. So I began university when I was 18. I studied computer science and management at University College London. And university was really a revealing time for me because I was living away from home. And sometimes when you disconnect from your normal environment, it brings a lot of wisdom in many ways. Sometimes we also need to do that in our life. We need to go to environments which challenge us, which help us to distance ourselves from the normal voices and opinions and expectations and traditions, so we can hear something deeper within ourselves. So that for me, that was university, the university experience. And I finished my degree, I graduated, and when I was 21, I decided that I needed to think more deeply about my why, about my purpose. What is my dharma in my life? And so I went to India, and I lived in an ashram there for 6 months when I was 21. And we lived on the floor, slept on the floor, lived out of a locker, woke up at 4 a.m. every morning, as they do in the monasteries. And it was really a beautiful time for me. I found my calling. And so I came back to London at the age of 21, and I told my mom I need another year. And so I joined the monastery there for another year. And as time went by, I realized this was my direction in my life. And so, I've been a monk for, I guess, something coming up to 25 years now. Nowadays, I travel more. I was based in the London monastery for about 20 years, and now I kind of travel place to place. So it's been a beautiful, for example, this month we've been all across America. So we've done everything from community programs to going into corporates. We were at Amazon, Google, Intel, Apple. We went to universities. We went to Stanford. Yesterday we were at Princeton. And it's just beautiful in different arenas just to try to share spiritual wisdom and show how no matter what life you lead, no matter where you are, no matter what identities and roles you've taken on, you can remain there. But what you can do is reorientate yourself in those 5 things we talked about: your goal, your driver, your measure, your mentality, your character, and thereby do what you're doing, but do it in a much more powerful way that will actually bring inner fulfillment. So yeah, we're traveling and trying to do that, play that role, and I guess that's a little bit about me and how I end up like this before you today. So thank you so much. So thank you everyone so much for coming. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you for your participation. It's always nice to keep it a little spontaneous, and I think we explored things hopefully that were relevant to you, and I guess we'll have some time later on this evening also to exchange a little bit more. So thank you very much. Thank you so much.